Hi everybody, welcome to my review video for exercise 6. As you know, we completed exercise 6 before we left for spring break. However, it's been a couple of weeks. There's obviously a lot going on in the world in terms of the spread of COVID-19 and how it's impacting our daily lives. And so I think it's important to take a step back and review the skills that we already learned before we move forward with the course. So that's what I'm going to do for you in this video. Before I get into exercise 6, I just want to state clearly for everyone that I'm not expecting that you complete the midterm project prior to the start of class on Tuesday. That was the initial deadline for the midterm project. However, after assessing the situation and how local governments were responding to COVID-19 and its spread, I decided that I didn't need to add any stress to your lives, so I sent you that email that said, set aside the midterm project, focus on yourselves, your friends, and your family. And I told you that when we got back to class on Tuesday, I would walk through the midterm project with you in a series of videos. And so that's what I'll do. So again, don't worry if you didn't work on the midterm project over spring break. I'm not expecting that you complete it. I also want to point out that I've uploaded an amended syllabus to Blackboard, and I encourage you to take a look at that syllabus before the start of class on Tuesday. You'll notice that we're going to follow a different schedule given the disruption, and I also provide you with information concerning how the course is going to be structured given that we've moved from an in-person class to an online class. So again, I encourage you to have a look at that before we come to class on Tuesday. For now, I'll get into going through exercise 6. So if you haven't already, I'd go ahead and download that workbook that's on Blackboard and also download the data. And so when you open up the data, of course, we want to take a look at what we're dealing with. So these are crime incident data that I've actually made up. They're not real. So they're structured in a way that's similar to data that we've worked with in the past. So we've got a series of variables that are in our columns, and we've got rows that represent individual crime incidents. In terms of the variables that we have, we've got the date and time of occurrence. We have the day of the week that the incident report was completed, hour of day, the first offense, whether an arrest was made, who the officer was who is taking the report, and what type of crime it is, the category of crime. Right, so not dissimilar from data we've worked with in previous exercises. And if you recall, in this exercise we started working with pivot tables. In the weeks prior, I had you aggregating data and creating charts in Excel manually. Right, so recall we used various formulas to get data in a format such as this, in a format that's appropriate to make charts. And I was a little bit withholding because there's actually a much easier way that we can do this, and that's through pivot tables. I didn't do this to torture you. The reason I had you learn the formulas is because hopefully you'll see that you'll understand better what's going on in the background of Excel as you're starting to work with pivot tables. So the first thing we'll want to do, and this is starting at step 1 in the workbook, is insert our pivot table. And this is pretty simple. All we have to do is go up to the ribbon in Excel, click on that Insert tab, and select the pivot table option. And now when you do, this Create Pivot Table dialog box will appear. The first thing we need to do is specify the data that we want to work with in our pivot table. And we do this pretty simply by clicking and holding in cell A, and then we can drag over to column I. And what we've told Excel is that these are the data that we want to work with in our pivot table. Next thing we want to do is to tell Excel where we want the pivot table report to be placed. Now you could keep it in the existing workbook, but I think it's easier to work in a new workbook. So I'm going to click this bubble, and then I'm going to click OK. And when we do, what we'll see is that a new sheet is created. And in this sheet we have a canvas, and this is where the pivot table is going to appear when we make specifications from the pivot table fields boxes that we have here on the right of your spreadsheet. And so at this point we are at step 4 of the workbook, and in step 4 I tell you the first thing you should do is to click the day of the week bubble. Now when we click day of the week bubble, we'll see that we have a column that appears, and in that column we have different days of the week appearing in different rows. You should also notice that when you click the day of week, that variable appeared in the rows box. So we told Excel when we click days of the week that we want our rows to be individual days of the week. The next thing I have you do is click on day of the week and hold, and then drag that down to the values box and release. And now when you do that, you'll see that we have a new column, and in this column what the pivot table did for you was count the number of incidents that were reported on each day of the week. And so in 2 easy steps in using pivot tables, we were able to aggregate our data. Right? Think about what we were doing before. We were using formulas. So we used a formula like the count if function. So we told how we did this was we told Excel that this cell is going to correspond to the following formula, right? That count if function, where we selected the column that we were working with. In this case, it's day of the week. And then we told Excel that we wanted to count the number of times that a certain value appeared in that column. So we'll just choose Sunday here. We'll close this out. And when we click enter, what you'll see is 67 is now populating this cell, and that's exactly what we have in the cell of our pivot table. Right? So this is much easier than using this count if formula for each day of the week. So I'll go and delete this here. And so we can do this for any of the variables in our data set. So in the next step, I tell you to uncheck day of the week, and I tell you to check reporting officer. And when you do that, as you see, we've got the different officers in this hypothetical police department appearing in individual cells. And if we drag down to the values field, we'll see the number of reports that each officer took. And so at this point we've hit step 6, and in step 7 I ask you to change the different settings here in our pivot table fields to answer a couple of different questions. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here. I'm going to ask you to take the time to complete the rest of step 7 by yourself, and then in the next video I'll show you the correct answers. I'll work through those steps with you, and we'll see whether you got your answers correct. All right, so I will see you in the second video.